Welcome back to another episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Parrish from Gainesville PD in Georgia, 26 years experience in law enforcement, and he is a huge mental health advocate. So I'm really excited to have him as a part of today's episode. Welcome to the show, Chief Parrish. Thank you so much for being here. I'm really looking forward to it. We were kind of laughing offline because our first conversation when we first met, I was like, this conversation is gonna be so good. And I had so many notes. So I'm really looking forward to diving in. But I was hoping that we can maybe start with some intros. So anyone who's listening who doesn't know you, if you can give us a little bit of background.
I grew up in this town, been here almost half a century, and it's a very different town than the one I grew up in. I was sharing with somebody the other day, I think since I was born, I've lived in 9 different houses, and they're all within a 10-mile radius, and that's as a child, as an adult. So very much a hometown. Atlanta has grown into us. The county where Gainesville is home of the Atlanta Falcons. So, we're becoming more and more metropolitan every day. I think as our nation sees growth, we're obviously seeing that growth here. Just in my career, my entire 26 years has been here at the police department. Started as a patrolman, fresh out of college, and our population is just short of doubling in that short amount of time. Uh, the land mass hasn't really doubled, but the population has. So those unique challenges. But I think if you find people that really know me, they'll tell you um, I like to have fun. I don't like to take things too serious. And if you ask the people closest to me, they're like, I have no idea, A, how he's a cop, and B, how he's a police chief. He just doesn't act like one. And I don't know what one acts like. I just enjoy doing what I get to do, and it's an honor to do it.
I was gonna say, I feel like that might be a compliment. I was just having a conversation about the importance of authenticity in whatever it is that you do, and you can strive to be the best at what you do, but without losing a sense of who you are along the way. And so I think that if someone says, hey, like, you're a little bit different, like you are uniquely you, I would take that as a huge compliment, and because I think that so often, and this was kind of a part of the conversation I had before, but so often we try so hard to be just like everybody else, like this like stamp and repeat, and we lose who we are along the way, but then you also lose that like growth and innovation and like free thinking because you're just so consumed. And I've done this in my career. I'm not like not guilty of this. Like I was definitely earlier in my career trying so hard to be like my mentors or be like the other people like in the industry. And I think over time I realized the importance of being who you are, but also trying to be the best at what you do.
Very well said, because when you mention mentors, I think that's where I personally struggled before. I have these mentors in the profession that I really look up to, and they may think like me, but they don't necessarily act like me.
Mhm.
I can't tell you the number of times that we've had a staff meeting or something, and I go in and I'm like, I want to be serious, or I want to deliver the message like so and so did when it was delivered to me. And I'm not, I'm just Jay. And if I
Mhm.
get a chance to make a joke, crack a joke, make people laugh, that's what I enjoy doing. So even though I've tried to emulate those that I look up to, um, I I'm just not that person.
Yeah. Well, I think, when we talk about um, leadership and dealing with people, because that's what this is, right? It's a business of people. Like attracts like, and people want to relate to a human, and so I think that that has to be a strength, like if people like who you are, not just as Chief Parrish, but they like who you are as a person underneath it all, I would guess that that creates more of that bond and more of that trust because they know who you are, and they're buying into you, not the
Right.
title.
Exactly. And the title Chief Parish is probably the least liked title that I have. Um, there's kind of I grew up here, so there's people in the town that know me, and my officers kind of make light of the fact that someone says I know Chief Parrish, they're like, well, you don't really know him. But when they say I know Jay, then they know I'm probably about to get a phone call from them.
Yeah.
My mom named me Jay, and that's what I like going by. I'm proud to have the title Chief, but going back to what you were talking about, it's the relationships, both internal to this agency, but also external.
Yeah.
If I can be on a first name basis with someone, we go back 5 years ago during the George Floyd riots across the nation, right? It's easy to say I hate law enforcement. It's easy to say all cops are bad, that all cops are racist. It's easy to say that, but it's hard if you have a relationship with someone to say Jay is this way. And so my whole leadership philosophy is all about building relationships with people. Um, that there's just that's what we're here for. We're a social being. And if we can build relationships and then when I have a relationship that somebody can call me by my first name, but they choose to call me Chief, then I know it's a show of respect. And but you're 100% right. You've got to build authenticity, and it's got to be relational. It can't be emails, text, social media. That's just not who we're designed to be. And so I really enjoy building connections one on one with people.
Yeah. Well, and I think as you start to peel back those layers, you start to build like more empathy, more trust, more connectiveness, more understanding. And I think that we do miss that sometimes, like I think we're all guilty of that in one way or another, of like placing judgment instead of really trying to peel back the layer of who someone is versus what they do. I really like that you said that that's your least favorite title, because I know you have different titles in your life, right? Anyone who's listening, like you might be a husband, a wife, you know, mother, a father, there's all different like titles, names. And I had to, I have my team too. And I remember, like my right hand girl, she kept saying like our founder page, our founder page. I was like, stop saying that. I was like, just say page. Like,
Yeah,
Paige
that's
does
how it
this,
feels, right?
because it feels weird to me,
Yeah.
and like, yes, that is true. Like, and I am proud of what I do, just like you said, but it feels like so like official to me that like I'm on board with you. Like I would much rather someone call me and be like, "Hey Paige, what's going on?" Than like treat me as like some like top of the pyramid or something. Like
Yeah,
it
that
makes me
demanded
uncomfortable.
respect. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
demanded respect. You're at the top, I have to respect you. Well, then you probably haven't done your job at leadership.
yeah, 100%. I know that you've been in this career for 26 years. That's a
Mhm.
long time to be in law enforcement. What do you think keeps you motivated and passionate today?
Those relationships. I'm very extroverted and I don't like sitting still. I'm not the kind of person that can sit and watch TV. I force myself to try to read every night,
Mm,
rather than aimlessly scroll on social media. I'm guilty of it by all means, but some of the mentors that I talked about, these leaders, they just read books over and over, right?
mm,
And so I try to get that self time. However, I'm just I get filled up by building relationships, especially with our team. We have about 120 total employees, and I'm far more motivated when one of those team members comes to me and asks me about a tax question. Should they buy so and so? I'm having this issue with my spouse.
mm,
They can figure law enforcement questions out. And there's a huge chain of command that have those answers. But sometimes they'll come to me and say, "Hey, my wife and I are thinking about buying a house at so and so. You know about the area." That motivates me just have those offline conversations. I'll be walking to my car and a team member will come up and it starts with, "Hey, how you doing?" And then all of a sudden we're down into conversation about parenting or aging parents, whatever it is. That's where I get my motivation. That's what inspires me. That's internal. Externally, I'm just really motivated by a community that still has somewhat of a small town footprint. We have large town issues, but we're trying to solve them at a small town footprint. And so, just before this recording, before we came online, I was on the phone with a couple of nonprofit people, really dealing with an issue that's not a law enforcement issue, but they called me because they respected my opinion on the issue,
mm.
and that motivates me. Just
Yeah.
having those connections and being a part of it. It's hard to think about. I'm an avid fisherman. I fish all over Georgia and into Florida. But and people talk about when you're going to retire and just go fishing all the time. Hey, I love it, but I think that would get boring. It doesn't energize me like this does.
Yeah. It's really interesting that you said that because, we were talking a little bit offline along this same kind of topic about how disconnected we are today versus maybe how we were 30 years ago, and I feel really lucky that I had the opportunity to grow up in a time where there was more of that relationship building and connectedness and like we got dirty, like, our parents kicked us out and they were like, well, really my grandparents, they were like, get out, go out, play around, with your cousins or whatever, your friends. Don't come back until the lights come on,
Right.
And we didn't have, I mean, I didn't have social media until I was in college and I was like forced to get social media by a friend. I didn't even want it. And I think what we were saying before is it was maybe a happier, more present, more fulfilling time. And right now, with so much distraction, it is so easy to not build those relationships, to not have those conversations, to not look someone in the eye and feel connected with someone and get to know someone on a personal level. And so everything that you're talking about really is, in my mind, wellness of how can you build not only relationships, but how can you be mindful during those times? How can you have more presence in your life rather than escaping, avoiding, numbing, isolating?
Absolutely. And Paige, the what you said there about isolating and unconnecting. So I was in a training class this week. There's probably 200 people. And at one point, I just looked around and I would bet 75%, it's a big auditorium, one speaker, 200 people. There's only the people in the front row can probably really the speaker see because of the lighting in his eyes. And guess what they're doing? They're staring at their cell phone. There's
Hmm.
no way they're connected to what the message is from the stage.
Hmm.
And so I just kind of made it then, sorry, I was trying very hard. I just put my cell phone away, put it on do not disturb so that I'm not getting disturbed. And it's difficult because we're so accustomed to these small little, what I call goldfish moment. A goldfish only has a small attention span that we can't listen to somebody speak for 40 minutes. We just get lost in our mind or we get bored and it becomes this stress thing. We pick up our phone and then we start looking. I didn't have that growing up either. You talk about having social media in college. I didn't have email in college, but uh, we literally had a bulletin board that's where we communicated. You put notes on the board and
Yeah.
you checked it every day. But growing up, that if I miss anything in life, it's growing up in those times. I grew up in a big neighborhood. Both parents worked. I was a true latchkey kid.
Mm.
And sometimes I never even made it in the house when the bus dropped me off. It was get on the bicycle and go find kids. And if my parents wanted to know where we were, they drove around and you would see a pile of bicycles laying in a driveway.
Yeah.
And that's where we were. And like you said, when the street lights come home, you better be home.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point that you made that actually no one has ever made on this podcast before, but I can relate to because I've done presentations and I've also been an attendee at, different law enforcement wellness or first responder wellness conferences and things of that nature. And you're exactly right. Um, I actually had an experience where I was the presenter, and it's such a hard thing to do because you don't want to tell people what to do, right? But I remember having that go through my mind of like, what if I just said, hey, like laptops down,
Yep.
like, hey, phones away. What would the response to that be? Because I've learned over my, 8, 9 years being in the space of like meeting people where they are, try not to like speak indefinites that are going to put people on the defense because you want people to be
Right.
open and receptive to things. But if people aren't even paying attention in the first place, then like, what's the point? So I find that to be really interesting. And now I have a few conferences coming up and presentations coming up Maybe it's a test. Maybe I'm like, hey
Uh,
guys, we're talking about wellness and presence and mindfulness.
right.
Like, if you guys really, really have to take a call, totally get it. But like, maybe we can try for the next 45 minutes to not have laptops. I understand maybe some of you are taking notes. You don't need it. I can send those to you at the end. Let's just
Yes,
like put it down
absolutely.
and connect with each other. That'd be an interesting experiment to see if there's resistance or if people are more open to that.
I know how it would be in the law enforcement community, even in my staff meetings. I would get tons of resistance, but it
Yeah.
felt so much better. And then my mind would drift, and it was almost like meditating because I would force myself to focus back into what the speaker was saying and what they were talking about. And it's that active listening piece which builds relationships. Um, I would say, Paige, try it first when you go to a conference for yourself. Don't take your cell phone. Like, none of us are so important that we got to get a phone call within 45 minutes. Like, whatever that worst case scenario is, um, even if it's the loss of an immediate loved one, 45 minutes for the moment you're in, your rest of your life's going to change in that scenario. So take
Yeah.
those 45 minutes. It's just that being present. We're right here having a conversation. Be present about it. And I think that goes on and on. How many families, and my family's really guilty of this, and then we call each other out on it, go to the dinner table, few even go to the dinner table, but then when they're there, and if you got teenagers, there's a cell phone in their hand.
Mhm.
I can't tell you the number of restaurants I've walked into, sat down, you look across the room, there's a family. They're not building connection.
Mhm.
Um, I, and to me, that page is like this huge thing about mental wellness. Like our strongest support structure, which is our families, we're disconnecting from them in that time that we're present together. Um, Last year we went on vacation, and my wife and kids were in another car because I was coming from somewhere else. And my wife told me, she was like, on the way down here, our oldest son had his guitar out. He's playing the guitar in the back seat. The younger one, they're all singing, they're having fun.
I
And
love
she was
that.
like, it was just like the best moment because you're in the car and you're actually enjoying it. And I think technology's great. Hey, we're 3 time zones apart having this conversation.
Yeah.
So technology has a lot of pluses, but when you look at some of our younger youth and we talk about mental health and the damages to mental health, technology is really doing it. I mean, there's no doubt the scientific fact is there that when you look at suicide levels, especially in teenagers, how that is so affected by social media. A county just north of us lost a teenager last week to suicide,
Mhm.
and I don't know all the details, but I know it had a lot to do with some social media influence and negative influence and bullying and things like that. Or even if it's just trying to keep up, right? When you think this is how I'm supposed to be, hey, you're supposed to be your authentic self, whatever that is. And if people don't like it, they don't like it. But
Yeah.
there will be people that do. And I really fear, I mean, I think social media is probably a level 1 carcinogenic if I was betting on it.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. And I honestly like I have so much gratitude for the time that we grew up that we didn't have that because I don't know if mentally I could have handled that, the
I couldn't.
comparison and everything that happens. And it's interesting that you talked about connectedness because, and I've said this in a couple podcasts because I just learned about it and I think it's so fascinating, but I want to share this with you. But I want to say something first, kind of going back to the like put your phones down for a few minutes. We have a lot of leadership that listens to this podcast. So maybe that's a like a nice little reminder for all of us to try to do that within ourselves. But there was this study that I just learned about that was trying to figure out what is one of the key indicators to longevity. And that's a happier, healthier life, right? And it was an 80-year study, like 80 years. So really, really long study. They studied a bunch of people and they were trying to figure out what is it? Like, what is that one or a couple things that like really just impact longevity, happier, healthier lives? And the one thing, the one indicator that they found was relationships and the quality of your relationships. And it wasn't just your core family unit, which that is also very, very important, but they also said your friendships, like your direct circle outside of your family. So it 100% is wellness. And I just learned about this study, I think 3 days ago, and I was like, wow, that is really cool because one, I think that we all have the ability to nurture those things, over time, but it is also the one thing that I think takes the back seat, especially when we're so career focused and, like we have that one track of like, we gotta hit these financial goals, we gotta hit these professional goals, that a lot of times it's the relationships that suffer. And so I thought that was a really, really interesting study that relationships are the key indicator to a happier, longer life.
Right. That amazing. Absolutely. I can see it. I probably research that study when we get done because you asked me what keeps me going, and I said it's those relationships. And I'll also tell you this, there's some disputing of the numbers. But since, I think it was 22 or 23, CDC puts out a longevity study in the US. It showed males mid or early 70s, females late 70s. I want to say like 73 and 78. That number is certainly down from what it was 10 years before because of the COVID curve. But different studies, and there's not been like a huge pot that a pool of candidates, but certain cities like big, I think New York did one, Detroit did one. What we do know is that a law enforcement officer lives 15 to 20 years less
Yeah.
than a normal adult male or a normal or adult female, their same gender. Um, that's significant. Now, that doesn't the young officers and the officers dying in the career, whether it be felonious or a car wreck, that affects it, right? Because it can be a dangerous, but it's not like our life expectancy is so much less because we're getting killed in the line of duty. That's nil compared to the number of cardiac issues, cancers. I mean, we just pump our body full of cortisol all the time. Cortisol, cortisol, fight or flight. Always have your head on a swivel.
Hmm.
Be ready for the enemy to attack. And we're on that hypervigilance. We're pumping our bodies full of cortisol. We don't have any mechanism to release it, and it's killing us. It's literally killing us. We tell our officers all the time, be safe, take care of yourself, look after your brother or sister. And we don't look after ourselves. So to tie that together, one of the first things that I see officers doing in their career is severing their relationships.
Mm.
We build this in God we trust and everybody else we check warrants on. And we build this mindset that everybody's out to get us. They're all the, big bad wolf, even when it goes into our immediate families. Well, they don't know what I see on the streets. You're right, they don't know. But it's that mentality of cutting off those relationships that I think has an effect on that longevity.
Yeah.
I don't hang out with cops outside of work. A lot of the cops in my network are friends, but no one in my immediate friend group, those 4 or 5 go-to men are police officers. And that's by design because I don't want to talk about this career when I'm not at work. I want to talk about fishing. I want to talk about my Georgia Bulldogs. It's all
Yeah.
those other things that I want to talk about. And that's so important for cops to understand is you got to have circles outside of this circle. And I do think the younger generation of cops sees it. I really do. But they sever those relationships. And it starts with those relationships that are very peripheral.
Mm.
Maybe it's just a police citizen contact. They don't try to build commonality. I'm the police officer, you're the citizen. What do you need from me? And they don't try to build a relationship with that person, even if it's just a one-time encounter. And then it moves to the friends they grew up with. Less and less time, but probably because they're working. They're working long shifts and they're signing up for overtime, and they're working extra jobs. And then it moves, closer. I don't have time to talk to my siblings. I don't have time to talk to my parents. Um, they don't, I go to a family dinner and I'm looking around the whole time like, his brother-in-law gonna stab me in the back finally, and it just you start severing it. So it's that relationship. If the studies are showing that relationships add to longevity, it makes sense why we're dying
Yeah.
earlier.
Well, and I think too, the more, at least for me, and this is my experience, the more I shoved things down and didn't deal with things, the more stressed and unhappy I was, the less I wanted people to, because it changes you. Like that changes your behavior. Like for me, the more I did that, the angrier I was. The more impenetrable that wall became, the more judgmental I was on other people. I didn't have empathy for other people because, to what you said, I was like, well, they don't know what I've been through. Or like if I heard something, I'm like, that's nothing, like I've been through way worse, so there's like this comparison, this like lack of empathy. These are all things I did, right? I can't speak for anybody else, but in my life, all of the trauma and stress that I went through, I shoved it down. I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want people to think that I was weak or broken. And so shoved it down, became hardened, became angry, became judgmental, had no empathy. And because of that, I didn't want people in my direct circle who were going to call me out for that. I didn't want people to ground me. And so that's where I think a lot of my isolation came in, is I was like, well, if I push them away, there's no one that's going to call me out on my stuff. I'll say it in a very like nice PG way, on my stuff, and I can continue to act this way. And when you have people in your circle who you maintain, who know who you are, and they can start to identify those behaviors and those like red flags, you know, that's a good thing, in my opinion. Like that is a good thing to have someone say, hey, like I'm noticing this. Like what's going on? Like I know who you are, and like I know like this is not how you normally behave. I think that we should maintain those relationships that are going to not only ground us, call us out a little bit, but also bring us back to who we are. And sometimes we need that reminder. Sometimes you don't know like how your behavior is or how you've changed unless you have a different perspective of someone telling you that. And I thought it was really interesting that you said the 4 or 5 people. I'm assuming that you've heard that study as well, of like they say that you are a, a reflection or a product of the 5 closest people to you.
Right. Yeah, yeah, I've heard
Yeah,
that. Okay.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I have heard that,
yeah.
and I'm sure if my wife listens to this podcast and she removes herself from those other 4 or 5 people, she realizes she's got a lot of influence to make compared to my other friends. Now, she loves them all, but
Yeah.
to that point, um I think that's what police officers really need to understand. We're so ingrained in being in charge and being right. Hey, I have to be right. If I police officers, think about it as a guardian of our democracy, as a guardian of the United States, which is different than a warrior, right? Warriors we send into foreign lands, and every officer knows the guardian warrior story. They go and conquer. Our soldiers, our Marines, airmen, sailors, that's our warriors. The guardian is here. So if you go back to the Roman Empire, that Roman guard, if he struck down a Roman citizen, he had to answer to the king for that. So we get, so ingrained. If I pull somebody over in a traffic stop, I'm infringing on their Fourth Amendment, right? That seizure, that freedom from governmental seizure. So I have to be right, and we don't allow latitude for people to tell us when we're wrong. And
Mm,
it's not about being wrong about law. It's not about being wrong about how to handle a situation. It's about being wrong in how we're acting, how we said something, what we said. Become so defensive, and as that cortisol's still in there, and that's usually where it goes, that we unload on these people. And maybe it's just a spouse, it's your best friend saying, "Hey, I've been noticing you seem to be acting this way. Is everything okay?" And in the last 10 years, that's what's helped me more than anything is when somebody, and it's not always easy. I'm going to sound like I'm some superhero for saying this, but you get to my team, they'll tell you that I fail at this daily. But when someone calls you out on your stuff, that you don't defend it, you just pause and think, okay, this person's trying to help me. Because
mhm,
I don't call people out that I don't, quote unquote, care about. If
mhm.
if somebody's acting out and it doesn't directly affect me, there's no reason for me to call them out. That's why I hate seeing these social media arguments. No two political beliefs have changed the other person's political belief by arguing on Facebook, and they never will.
Right.
It just blows my mind at how we divide ourselves instead of finding out where our commonality is. And so I really feel like when it comes back to relationships, for my mental health, when I realize somebody is, and around here at the Gainesville Police Department, we call it having a tough conversation. When somebody comes in and says, "Hey, Chief, you're doing this, and I don't know if you are intended or not, but it has this effect on me or this effect on our team. And it could be something from the way I walked in the door and didn't speak, or tons of different things. And
Sure.
instead of getting mad about it, I have to pause and say, okay, they care about me. They care about my success, which is really true when my wife calls me out or even my kids, when they tell me what you're doing is not you. And I have to pause and be like, okay, yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
My sister, who's a licensed clinician, mental health clinician, she's always like, "Will this matter 5 years down the road? Will you remember it 5 years down the road? Well, then don't waste your time on the decision. Like if don't get so wrapped up in what's going on right now that it doesn't affect 5 years down the road."
Yeah. Yeah, that I mean that's difficult for me too. I've had to learn that like tactical pause,
Mhm.
like we just put tactical in front of anything and it like works,
Right.
right?
Oh yeah, and everybody will listen too, right?
But that like tactical pause of like not reacting right away, that's emotional regulation,
Mhm.
right? That is trainable. But it takes a certain amount of self-assessment and like awareness to be able to do that, right? And it's a lot of trial and error. And I've definitely like had a lot of people call me out where they're like, "Hey, like you responded really quickly to that and that was not the best." And you're like, "Oh no, like okay, like I got to dig myself out of this now." And anyone who's listening can relate to that. There's never been a time like anyone, if you say that you have never ever responded to something and you were like, "Oh no," after the fact, like that wasn't the best, like you're lying. Everyone has done that at some point in their life where they're like, man, that maybe that wasn't the best, right? But it's through learning through those experiences, I think that's the most important. And how can we take those moments where we're like, okay, maybe there was room for improvement there, and how can we try to make it better next time and have more of that self-awareness next time? And I I really focus and I want to talk to you a lot about mental health because I know that mental health is something that's really important to
Right.
you. But um, the one thing that I have really tried to do and I really try to teach is having nervous system regulation as often as you can, and not taking things personally, like what you were saying, like those hard conversations, right? It's like, how can we breathe through it? How can we take a tactical pause? How can we decide our actions and our reactions? And one of the things that I teach a lot is um, control the breath first, right? That's nervous system
Right.
regulation. And the mind is going to follow the breath. So if the breath is erratic, the mind is going to be erratic, right? It's like the two are correlated. So how can we learn? And we can do this not in the hard situations. We can do this like in regular life too, right? But how can you regulate the breath first? So you're regulating the nervous system. That's step one. Then, if you can control the breath, you can control your mind. So, where the mind goes, right? Like what it starts to think about. And then, if you can control the mind, you can control your actions and your reactions to things, right? So,
Right.
control the breath, control the mind, control actions, reactions. And easier said than done. I make mistakes still to this day, even though like I teach these things. But I think how can we have that self-assessment? How can we have that emotional regulation as often as we can? And then if we do mess up, how can we learn from that?
Right.
I want to talk a little bit about, your kind of
Mhm.
trajectory in this wellness space because I know that it's something that you're really passionate about. Mental health has been something that you have really been prioritizing for a long time. I think you told me it's been like over 5 years that you've really been like pushing for this. And I want to know first, why? Why is this something that's so important to you?
Right. I wish I could go back to a moment in time that it kind of clicked, but it was a lot of it was on a personal journey. I mentioned my sister being a clinician. Uh, One day, talking about calling people out, she worked in a school. My son went to school there. There was an issue with a teacher. I called her ranting about it, and she's listening to me. She's kind of being big sister, being counselor. And then I can tell you the moment of where I was standing. I was standing just outside my garage talking to her. And finally, she's like, Jay, you're kind of overreacting to this whole thing. And have you ever thought that maybe you're a little depressed? It
Mm.
does run in our family. And before that, Paige, if you would have told me somebody, I knew that I had family members that suffer from depression and anxiety. Heck, we all do, but it's acute, not chronic. But I always saw it as a weakness. Like if you got to be mentally tough, and it's if you're feeling depressed, it's because you're not looking at the right things. If you're feeling anxiety, you're not handling it well. I have family members that suffer from like manic depression. And
Mhm.
for whatever reason, I thought if you had a mental illness, that it was, something similar to Down syndrome. You were born with it and you always had it and you couldn't develop it. So she called me out on it and kind of opened this conversation. And there's a lot of other pieces going around it. If I'm acting like that and my big sister is willing to call me out on it, think about what my wife's living with. And it was just
Mhm.
that traditional 12, 13-year cop that doesn't trust anybody, always has his back against the wall, literally in a restaurant, head on a swivel, the world's coming after us. And so she gave me some suggestions, and that was the first time that I went individually to see a counselor. That was the hardest walk, and I'll tell you a interesting story about that. You know, if we go to our physical health doctor, traditional medical doctor, right? We sit in the waiting room and there's 20, 30 other patients there. You may recognize somebody and you'll go right into the conversation of some really sometimes disgusting things that are going on with you physically that you're at the doctor for. And we don't mind having those conversations. But when our headspace isn't right, the first time I went to see a counselor, the counselor called on the cell phone, tell me where to come. And they were like, all right, you're going to come in this door and ring the bell, let us know you're there. But then when I was leaving, I had to go out another door because I wasn't allowed to see the next person coming to see my counselor.
Mm.
Like the and so it's almost like, hey, it's not okay. It's secret. We do drug deals more open than that, right? It's like, what in the world?
Yeah.
You got to go out this back door and your car's parked over here. And they so far that we couldn't even park in front of the office. They want us to park across the street where it's closer to the hospital and nobody would recognize your car. I do think, almost 15 years later, we're way past that. But
Yeah.
that was the mindset. And so my journey kind of started there is realizing I'm becoming somebody I don't want to be.
Mm.
And as much as I tell you I like relationships, I was becoming somebody that people didn't want to have a relationship with me, even the ones that love me the most. So talking through that with a counselor, it, I started to, especially as I rose in the ranks through the police department, see that in other officers. And it became kind of my focus then. And I hate to do this on the podcast. I want to mess up the name of the book, but I found a book and it's either called Getting the Love You Want or Finding the Love You Want.
Okay.
It's all about marriage and those kind of things. But the first part of the book, I think the author's name, his last name is Harville or something like that. Um, the first part of that book is all about childhood traumas. And you were talking about childhood traumas a while ago and pushing them down. The reality is we all have them.
Mhm.
I've tried to be the best dad I could to my two boys. One's 20 years old, the other one's 15. The reality is I've created childhood trauma. I don't know what it is, and they may not know until they're my age or they're trying to be a dad or a husband.
Yeah.
Little things from accidentally being left at a store for 5 minutes or getting lost in a store as a 2 or 3 year old can be as severe as watching your parents fight, not knowing your parents are. You can't quantify or qualify what individual child feels as a trauma and what they carry and what they press down. So in reading that book and going to my own counselor, I started to realize, hey, a lot of the things that affect me um, are from my childhood. And I had a great childhood. My parents were great. I grew up Gen X though. And so as I was saying before, it wasn't, we raised ourselves. And I miss those moments. But there were things that affected me and they affected me deeply. And throughout my life, I would always talk about those things didn't affect me. But the reality is they did. And then in conversations, as I'm trying to mentor officers or just make friends, I would hear these things and my mind would go to like, what are they running from? What are they hiding from? Why can't they talk about their feelings? And I think I shared with you with that counselor, I'll never forget. She handed me a sheet of paper. I think it had like 20 faces on it, and I couldn't. Uh, Mad, happy, sad. That's all I could do is, are they mad, happy, or sad? And I started to be able to associate other feelings. I've heard of them, but what does fear look like? What
Mm,
is, anxiousness? Um, what is remorse? All these different feelings we had. I was able to uncover that, and then it just pressed me. Mainly, it started internally with my people, just seeing cops have a really high divorce rate. And when I became part of, the executive staff of the department, those divorces started to affect the employee and their employment and their performance. And so I would change those conversations not to, you're not showing up for work on time or you're calling out sick too much, but like what's going on in your life.
yeah.
That was kind of really where it started, and that's not even a Cliff Notes back of the book version, but that's where it started. It started in my own journey and uh, identifying those feelings and those fears that I had, and then being passionate about it for others.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And, I think it goes back to what we said about like, how can we have that self-assessment to understand ourselves first? And unfortunately, I'm going to say unfortunately and fortunately, the hardest things that we go through in our life, in my opinion, are our biggest opportunity to help other people. If we can learn from those things and we can identify what those things are, and then we can grow and thrive in spite of those things, and then we can be that source for other people, whether that's a source of education, inspiration, maybe just a shoulder to lean on because someone knows that you can relate to that. And I think that everyone who's listening has had those moments in their life where it does feel almost like shameful. You don't want people to think that you're broken or like know the messy parts of yourself. And we all, in some way or another, I think, wear like this like exterior, and we try to be really tough. And um, I, if I'm being completely honest, I didn't start talking about my stuff until I was working in this space. And this was a long time ago, but I had someone, this was several years ago, I had a chief look at me and he said, "Okay, tell me about you." And I was like, "What do you mean? I'm perfect.
Do that. Yeah,
I'm great.
exactly.
I'm perfect. Like, look at
Right.
me." I like, and he's like, "No, no, no." He's like, "First of all," he's like, "I don't hop on any calls with anyone who I don't do research on first.
Right.
That's our job
Right.
is to like figure out who you are."
I'm
Um,
guilty.
yeah. You're guilty too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, okay. And it was the first time that I had kind of opened up about it. And it was terrifying. It was so scary to like, start to like peel back those layers and like kind of like show your vulnerable side to someone. But it was also incredibly empowering. And I think my perspective that day really changed to, how can we start sharing collectively our stories? And I'm not saying that like, you have to go around all day, every day, dumping your stuff on people. I'm not saying that you need to do that, but when we can have open forums and conversations like this, where we're all like saying, hey, like we've all been through different stuff, maybe not the same stuff, but we've all been through stuff. And how can we, instead of judging ourselves or judging each other, how can we have more of an open mind? But then how can we also start to use that as a superpower? Because I truly, truly think that like all of the times that I fell on my face, all of the things that happened to me that were out of my control, that were really hard, all of the adversity in my life has brought me to this point where I am now. And I don't think that I would be as passionate about wellness and what I'm doing today if I didn't go through those things. And that's what I heard in your story is like, you're like, wow, like I went through all this stuff. And then it got me thinking, there's other people who are also going through these same things. How can I help them? How can I make a difference as a leader within this organization so that other people maybe don't feel that same like shame walking into a room, to talk to a counselor, or like how can we start breaking those stigmas and making wellness more normal. So I really appreciate you sharing that, and I hope anyone who's listening understands that, you know, we've all been through it, and I'm hoping that this makes it a little bit more like okay to talk
All
about.
right. And so I'll tell you two analogies that I share a lot when these conversations come up. One of them is people will say, my scars, and they're not talking about physical scars. They're talking
Right.
about their history. They're like, I have these scars, I have these emotional scars. That's not what it is. So put it in the like physical workout space. If you go and do a really tough physical workout, you're going to be sore tomorrow. Why? Because there's micro tears in your muscles, and that's what makes you stronger. And the whole goal is to tear those muscles up so that they hurt. Like you should be able to go to the gym and see when someone had a good leg day because they're going to have a hard time sitting down. It's going to hurt. And then you see somebody walking funny, and you're like, "Was it leg day?" And they're like, "Yeah." And we have those are what those are what those trials and adversity are. They're not scars. It's a workout, and it makes us stronger. But
Mm,
it only makes us stronger if we take the time to recover from it. If we just jump back in the next workout, it will be a scar because you're going to create an injury.
yeah.
So you got to be able to pause yourself just like it's a workout. If you go through something really difficult, you can't just immerse yourself back in this job. We'll have police officers lose loved ones or have I'm like, you're not coming back to work. Well, I
Mm,
don't have the time off. Well, then I'll assign you to your home to work because you have to downregulate. You have to let your mental self heal, and then you'll be stronger. And the other analogy, real quick, that I think I give this just for cops. I don't know. I've never worked in another profession. I've only worked around cops, but the things we see, right? It's abnormal. Again, 100% of statistics are made up on the spot, but saying that, I think I've heard before that the average adult will see like 3 to 4 unembalmed dead bodies in their lifetime, just average 3 or 4. And, a cop in 20 years sees about 300.
well, yeah.
And what kind of trauma does that create, right? So the analogy I use to our officers, you go to a bad car wreck, somebody's barely hanging on, you're doing CPR to somebody that just overdosed on fentanyl, whatever it is, that's a trauma, right? It's blowing up a balloon. So if I sit here and I blow, and I've done this in a classroom, I blow up the balloon, and each breath of air is one more trauma, one more trauma, one more trauma, one more event, one more call, things this as simple as I was running with my lights and sirens and almost had a wreck, and
Yeah.
my adrenaline went up, and I, got a little tunnel vision. Every one of those are just another breath of air to the balloon. Well, what happens? There's only three options. Option one is I keep putting the air in there and it explodes. And unfortunately to me, those are the suicidal. They never our profession is very high in a suicide rate, right? It's because they just kept pushing the air in and they never let it out. And then the other two options, there's two ways to let the air out. I can let go of the balloon, and what's it going to do? It flies all over the room, it blows spit on anybody nearby, and people do exactly what you do. They laugh. Some people laugh, some are grossed out. And that's where the cop really loses their mind and quote unquote, and I don't mean this disparagingly, they go crazy. They have that mental breakdown. That's letting go of the balloon and letting it do whatever. The real thing to do is slowly let that air out. And the faster you let that air out, and a lot of times it's sitting down talking to a counselor, talking to a peer, the faster you let that air out, the less evidence you're going to see of it on the balloon. So
Yeah.
in other words, if the balloon gets this big, and I let it go back down to little, you're going to see those creases. You're going to see it's not looking like the one that just came out of the pack.
Hmm.
None of them will, but the faster I let it out, and if I always start with an empty balloon, there's more room for things to go into it.
Yeah.
And I give those two analogies because to me, we have to regulate that mentally. And the reality is, how can we serve our populations if we're this balloon that can't fit through the door because it's full of so much air and you never know which one's going to cause it to pop?
Yeah, I love those analogies. I have never heard the physical part of it. I think it's really smart because people can relate to that, right?
Mhm.
Like you understand what it feels like to like have had a leg day, and
Right.
for me it's 2 days later, but
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
but there was a quote that really stuck with me from another chief, and it was along this lines of he's like, this job will change you, and it's like you said, like the balloon will never look like it did when it came out of the pack. Like
That's right.
it's gonna change you. But he said it doesn't have to break you. And
That's right.
I really appreciate the attitude of proactiveness, and of course there's time for both. There's time for reactive and proactive measures when it comes to wellness. And I really appreciate you saying, hey, how can we offload some of those things proactively before there's this big event, before you
Right.
quote unquote like lose your mind, or
Hmm.
before there's a mental health crisis, or before worst case scenario, right? Like how can you do that? And I love that you said a couple of those things, maybe
Right.
talking to someone, there's lots of different ways to do that. But I really like that. I've never heard that analogy of the gym, and I thought
Yeah.
that was really cool. I do want to, before we run out of time, I knew this was going to happen because I knew from our first conversation that it was going to be really good. But I want to highlight some of the things that you guys have done. So I'm going to kind of just toss you a softball and let you talk about it. But I know that you created the first in-house clinician program in Georgia. There's lots of different partnerships that you've worked on. So I'm going to kind of give you the floor to highlight some of those efforts.
And I'll be very clear when we pride ourselves a little bit on being the first to have an in-house mental health clinician. There were other models out there where the law enforcement agency contracted with a mental health agency to bring a partner in.
Mm,
Those are still out there. These, and I say ladies because that's all we have right now. These ladies work directly under my chain of command. They are paid by the city of Gainesville, work for the city of Gainesville. And if you would have told me 6 years ago, almost 7 years ago now, what this would turned into, I wouldn't have believed you. I would have told you it was unnecessary. But so if you go back to 2016, I'm sorry, 2014, we had Ferguson, Missouri, and what happened out there. And then for like the next 5 years, we really inside the law enforcement had to start fighting for our to be relevant, right?
mm,
Because there was media attacks on how law enforcement was interacting with the community and building these community relationships or the way we were going to see ourselves out of it. I promoted from captain to deputy chief during that time, and so I became more involved in the community. I started to get involved in our local nonprofits. I sat on some of the boards. I would attend some of the meetings. And what I saw was especially one local had built a collaboration of trying to see what was going on from a mental health standpoint in our community at large. I
mm.
think our local medical system did like a health needs assessment, and they had released that mental health was one of the lowest areas served by mental health providers, but yet the highest need.
Yeah.
And so I thought to myself, what can I do in that space? I was at a meeting and there was probably 30 people in the room. And they're talking about if this, then that. These are the mental health issues. And I know that my team is seeing it daily on the streets. It's one thing to be a mental health clinician, seeing someone in your office in a controlled space, but we were asking our officers to do what these men and women that have 7+ years of schooling, we're asking them to deal with it in the streets outside of a controlled environment. They're dealing with somebody that maybe something as simple as depressed to manically depressed and suicidal to, you name it, insert it here. And then you wrap drug use into that.
Yeah.
And so I gave a scenario. I said, let me tell y'all something. So, and I don't know if the rules and laws are the same now as when I gave this statement, but I said, you take a mother who is single mom, 4 kids living in government housing. The space is too small. The walls, it's not like a fun place to live. The walls are concrete. It's not a home, but they're living there and they can barely work because they're raising 4 kids. They don't know where their next meal's coming from. It's all they can do to keep the kids together. And then mom finds a boyfriend. Boyfriend happens to be a drug dealer. But what can he give her? Security and money, right? The two things she needs to keep going. Well, in government housing at the time, if somebody was arrested that didn't live there, could cause you to get evicted without even, a due process of hearing what happened. If somebody at your property got arrested, HUD could come and kick you out. So then you flip it to the law enforcement side. We had officers that, were chasing somebody for a probation warrant, some very low level arrest. That person runs into that house, and now we're fighting it out with mom because she's trying to protect what? Her livelihood. Our team's just trying to get an arrest. But she knows that she could lose her kids and that apartment and him if we get to him. And so what we're fighting for was just something small,
Yeah.
maybe just for some a stat. Hey, I made this arrest. But for the mom, it was fight or flight for life, right? And now she's got a felony obstruction charge on the officer. And when I made that room was like, hey, what can we do about that? How, it's not about dressing a policy of eviction. It's about how do we help that mom? How do
Mhm.
we help her before this event? And sometimes I'm a smart ass by nature. I say things that I probably shouldn't just to get a rise out of people. And I smarted off and I said, I'll tell you what, if y'all would put somebody in our police car that has your degrees, you would understand what I'm saying. It doesn't work out in the field like it does in your office. So the meeting was over, and a lady from the hospital named Tracy came up. She's like, Jay, I think we make this happen. I'm like, make what happen? I think we can actually get a clinician in your police car. And I was like, well, we don't have the money for that. I know what they make. And she's like, no, 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 no. We need to start identifying the stakeholders, identifying who it costs. It cost our hospital system a lot of money because we're taking these mental health people into an emergency department that's set up to treat physical injury, but they're taking seats to be seen, evaluated mentally. She's like, it costs the emergency department, it costs this group, it costs that group. Let's start pulling those together. And so, under the United Way of Hall County's umbrella, we started to come together and have this conversation. And two big groups. One is our North Georgia Community Foundation. They came to me and were like, hey, you find out how much it costs to get started, and we have the money to do a seed grant,
Wow.
but you have to show how it's going to be sustained. And then the medical center, Gainesville has a huge medical center. We serve all of Northeast Georgia. It's like 14 counties just from our medical center. Their president and CEO at the time, the vice president of their foundation came together and said, hey, we got we got a grant. So we had this seed grant from the community foundation. I think it probably paid like $50,000 or something for me to hire a part-time clinician and talk about this program. And then our hospital system gave us a grant of about $500,000 to
Wow.
run the program over the next 4 years. My view was our clinician could get called out to the field when we were dealing with somebody in a mental health crisis. Quickly, it became so much more. We have a large university right in the middle called Murnau University, right in the middle of our town that has a counseling program and is full of people that need internships. So we brought on interns, and they were non-paid interns, and then we're able to hire a couple of them. And I guess in Georgia, I don't know where else across, what the requirements are for a clinician, but they have to have like 3 years after school license supervision to get their full licensure. And it usually costs those students money to get that supervision hour. Well, we could give it for free because the first lady I hired that started our program had that. So real quickly, I end up with that grant was able to pay for three full-time clinicians. Um, and the community started piling on, and this is over a period of 6 years.
Mhm.
Um, Doug and Kay Ivester are big philanthropists in our area. Doug was CEO of Coca-Cola back in the mid 90s, and his foundation came to us, heard about what we were doing, said, hey, we want to get involved. And so now I have three other paid internships. So his foundation pays these Bernal interns to be part of our program. And I call it free labor, right? Because that's what it is to me. It's free labor. So now the team is grown to 6 people, And those interns switch about every year and a half. They overlap so that somebody you never have two new people or three new people. And then most recently, our health system here has a GME program for resident physicians that just graduated medical school, and they started one in psychiatry.
Mm.
And the leaders that coordinate that GME program now require them to ride with us for about 4 hours a day, once a week for 6 weeks. So this thing's now grown into not just co-responding in the field, but we have MDs, LPCs, licensed social workers. It's like one big division that was just a vision. I couldn't control it. They have all the letters behind their names to know what they're doing, but it's become so much more than just um, responding to a call. They
Yeah.
do what we call casework. I mean, responding to a call where they're needed in the field, probably 10% of the work they do. The majority of the work they do, and it kind of ties back to what we were talking about from an individual level. When these people come on our radar, and it may be through shoplifting, it may be through criminal trespass, what we identified in this program that we call our mental health co-responder program is people do these things due to resource deficiency. They don't have Maslow's food, water, shelter. And so instead of looking at it through the lens of, oh, they went up there and they shoplifted food from the gas station, it's you're worried about your next meal, weren't you? And we
Mm.
started pulling all the resources together, made what we call the resource book. Now there's tons of meetings, but we look at people on a case by case basis. And what was that event that we're trying to keep it from being the George Floyd event, where somebody's in a moment of crisis and have a law enforcement encounter? We're trying to make it, and we've had examples of this where the person in crisis called and requested our mental health clinicians come
Mm. Okay.
because they knew, and it's simple stuff, Paige. Sometimes it's like they don't know where to get their medicine, or the family members don't know how to manage them. And the family member may not realize, hey, if this person goes without their medicine once a day, they're going to decomp back to this state of mind. They've got to, and so it's as important as doing a follow up call and saying, "Hey, did you get to your doctor's visit?" And sometimes it's us driving them to the doctor's visit.
Yeah.
Uh, just things that we can be involved with that patient before they become somebody in the criminal justice system, because the criminal justice system, I've been doing this, like you said, 26 years, and sometimes it's hard for me to understand all the different courts, probation, jail. Like those are huge wheels. And if you get sucked into it, it's really hard to exit. It really is hard to exit. You know, you catch a misdemeanor charge and then you're on probation, then you can't pay your probationary fees. So you don't go see your probation officer, and then you get a violation of probation warrant out for you. And now you're running from the cops because you don't want to go see the judge. That's a vicious cycle. And so this whole program that it's grown into over the, since 2020 is all about trying to hit these people before that crisis. Sometimes we're very successful, sometimes we're not successful at all. But what I've learned in this mental health space of working with the community is it can be two steps forward, one step back, but you moved forward. And
Yeah.
the next time it may be two steps forward, five steps back, and you're behind where you started. But you can't give up on these people. Once they're on our radar, we just keep pushing until we can get them healthy. And then they're not a problem. So it's all about the pre-event, trying to reach them before the moment of crisis. And we have had, it's been a great program. The community's behind it. Just yesterday, we were awarded with a $10,000 grant to buy supplies and things for that program that taxpayer dollars can't buy, just because the group with the grant heard about us. It wasn't like I had to go write all this stuff. They heard about us, heard what we were doing, and these 30 something year old investors, there's like 80 people, 40 couples. They're called the Oak Society. Pulled their resources, said we want to make a difference in our community, and they selected this program. Now I'm able to use that money for like one example I gave, a young lady's getting out of jail. She's been in jail for 6 months. She is a opioid addicted. Like she's as addict as it gets, but she's been clean in jail. So here's the opportunity to start. She gets out on a Thursday, but rehab can't take her till Monday. If she's out on the streets Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, she's gone again. So now I can use this money to put her in a hotel room that's under our control where we can check on her. We can make sure she's got her food, clothing, and then get her to rehab on Monday morning without losing them. So that fun, that just shows, I use that example to show how much the community is behind this. And then lastly, I'll end with this. It was a hard integration. Law enforcement has got to be the toughest. And I know that you and I mentioned this, just you coming from your background into law enforcement and doing what you do. It was hard to get their acceptance. It was, they don't, they're controlling. They don't want to turn a call over. They darn sure don't want to turn the call over to somebody that doesn't have cop experience, right? Oh, this lady, this shrink. We're not
Right.
going to turn the call over to them. And now it is part of our culture. They are as much a co-worker as anybody else. Matter of fact, sometimes I think our male officers are a little overprotective of those ladies doing that work. It was for law enforcement leaders listening, it was not an easy cultural shift. It took time. And now we're on the other end. Sometimes law enforcement needs to handle a problem that they're given to the clinicians. And I'm like, that's not a mental health. Yeah, the person's crazy, but that was a crime. You should have handled it.
Yeah.
But it has been a fun journey. And I wish I could take credit for it. It was just an idea that I went and got some funding for. But the three ladies that run that program, that is their program. That's their baby. And every day they come back trying to, it's just making it bigger and better is amazing to me.
Thank you. I'm like smiling the whole time because I can see how excited you are. And
Yeah.
obviously, like, it's great when you come to the end of it and it's like successful, but
Right.
I'm sure all the steps and years it took to get there was really challenging, but there were so many things in there I kind of want to unpack a little bit, but I appreciated that you said that you weren't like you were trying to figure out the core of the issue
Mhm.
rather than looking at the symptom of it.
Right.
You know, you were like, yeah, they shoplifted, but why?
Right.
What's going on beneath the surface? And I think that you can also look at that when it comes to wellness, right? It's like,
Absolutely.
especially internally, like if you start to see like changes in behavior, it's like, okay, we can punish that, or we can say, like, why is this happening? And then what are the steps and resources that we can, provide that are going to help that person to succeed? And I've had a lot of interviews, and community policing is one of the things that comes up a lot, and especially in the context of wellness. Everyone, I shouldn't say everyone, the majority of people who I've talked to, at least everyone I've talked to, I will say that with confidence, who has gotten into this profession wants to help people. They really do. They want to help their community, right? Like I think that if you don't have that like deep-seated like why of like I truly want to make a difference and I want to help people, like it would be really hard to get to the end of this year or this career or 26 years into this career if you didn't truly have a passion for, wanting to help people. And it sounds to me like the program that you've created does a lot of different things. One, it connects your team with their why and their passion and their value of helping people within the community, truly helping them in a proactive way as much as they can. It also helps the community and it helps to build trust within the community. Like having someone call you and say, hey, how do I get my meds?
Right.
Like
Yeah.
that's trust, right? And so now you have this partnership between you and the community, which impacts everybody's wellness, right? It's impacted
Right.
the community's wellness, but now your officers are having these positive interactions or they're feeling like they're actually helping. Like that story, my parents were drug addicts. I saw them, struggle with addiction. I'm like going to get a little emotional. I saw them struggle with addiction my whole life. It is so hard to get out of that cycle. And when I started my career, I worked in rehab centers, I worked in detox, and I worked in inpatient centers. It is devastating to see these young people. A lot of them are so young, not everyone, but a lot of the people I interacted with were really young. And it's devastating to see that and to say, hey, we know that this young lady is getting out on a Thursday. She can't check into rehab till Monday. what can we do proactively to try to set her up for success? Because rehabilitation is possible. It's really hard, and a lot of people, really struggle with it. And I have firsthand experience with that. But I love everything that you're doing. Obviously, it's been a huge success, and I would imagine that not only does it help your community, but it also helps the culture and the wellness within your organization.
Sure. And now, to come back internal, just from having this program, and we require our officers to attend probably some mental health classes that other agencies wouldn't, but some that everybody would. There's mental health first aid, 100%. Like you have to have that before you can hit day one on the street.
Mm.
Um, but it's allowed our officers to understand more about mental health, thus understanding more about their own mental health.
Mm-hmm.
So the officers came to me and they wanted to create a peer support team for these trauma things. Like they learned that on their own of we can build peer support teams. And now instead of having to go see, a counselor, I can just go see so and so that I already trust, that I already have a bond. And it's perfectly okay to just start crying and say, having to take that baby out of that mother's arms was the worst thing I've ever done in my life. And I couldn't sleep last night. And all I can hear is mom screaming and baby screaming. And I can't get that out of my head. To be able to dump that onto a peer is empowering, right? Part of our program, and this is how it just all kind of interweaves together. Part of our program is we have a relationship, a professional relationship with our local team of peer coaches.
Mm-hmm.
So our peer coaches, all, 5 years sober, but decades in addiction. And now they have their, state certified peer coaching. And we will refer people that we think that drug is the core problem, not mental health. It's hard to bifurcate those, but if we feel like that drug use is the underlying issue, we need to deal with it before we can the mental health. We use our team of peer coaches in those relationships. And if you look at the 12-step model, that is like the origins of a peer support team, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so now I'm trying to teach cops to do what people that are in long-term recovery do. Go to your friends, get in the circle and be honest. Be honest to how things make you feel. And so just having that program has really made us look internal, and being around it, and it's also given the men and women of our team internal people. Now, our clinicians can't treat our team because of, dual relationship, but they hear them out and they hear what's going on, and they're able to say, "Hey, this is one of my friends in the business. I need you to go sit down with them." Or they just sit in there and dump everything out, and it's like a peer support, connection, and the officer feels better walking out. So there has been, spin-off unintended consequences that were very positive from
Yeah.
having the program and how it affected our team.
Yeah, I love that. And I honestly feel like I could talk to you for like 3 more hours, but I know we're kind of running low on time. So I do want to ask you one final question. And
Okay.
this is for the younger generation. So, what words of wisdom would you share with someone who's earlier in their career, maybe in the context of wellness? Something that maybe you wish that you would have known earlier, or something that's helped you along the way?
The word intentionality. You mentioned it a while ago. I've interviewed hundreds of potential police officers and several that went on to become police officers. I always say, "Why do you want to be a police officer?" And they say, "What? I want to help people." I say intentionality because you can't help others if you don't help yourself first. And what is intentionality? Paige, is a lot of the stuff you do. What I wish I would have known, I wish I would have known the little steps about physical health. I don't have to go, people say I want to, December 31st this year, there'll be 100 New Year's resolutions for the next day. We laugh at my gym because we can't wait till February when we get our gym back, right?
Yep.
And I'm not being disparaging to all those people making the New Year's resolutions, but intentionality, it's hard to do it in a day. You can't start working out right, eating right, exercising, all those things. You can't start doing it in a day. It's very little intentional steps along the way, small, degrees of change. I mean, if you move 1 degree every day for 360 days, you've done a full circle, right? But that's only 1 degree. Those are easy steps. So don't try to bite it off all at one time. Be intentional about connecting with those you love. Who is going to lower your casket in the grave? That's where your intention needs to be. The rest of it's just a job. Don't get caught up in working these long hours, not trusting anybody. Be intentional about what you do, whether it's how you eat, how you exercise, how you meditate, how you offload, how you let the air out of the balloon.
Mm.
Is intentionality one, and then, or I'm sorry, is advice one, and the other one. This comes from a very close friend of mine. He uses the word participate. Like, if I could tell you one thing that would change your career and change your life, it's participate. Get involved. Do not come to the job and just be part of the job, just be here. Get involved, be part of the change, come with solutions. There are, no matter where you live, I guarantee there's at least 5 or 6 nonprofits or churches or something that needs volunteers.
Mm.
Serving others is like the biggest reward thing, right? Like, most people, adults, enjoy the feeling of giving a gift versus receiving a gift.
Yeah.
And so your time is the same thing. Cops don't have a lot of money, but you do have a lot of time. Participate, get involved in your community, get involved in your organization, and be part of the solution. Don't get caught up in, this sucks, our boss sucks, my car sucks, my gun's old. Like, it's easy to get pulled in by the wolf and talk about how bad the profession is. Participate and be part of the solution. Intentionality and participate is the things that I would tell a young officer. I wish I would have done. I learned it way later in my career. Just be intentional about your day. Don't just wake up and get in that squad car and head out on the street. What is it you're going to do today? Name 3 things. I'm going to stop in. I'm going to meet this business owner. If I see somebody out in their yard, I'm going to get out and talk to them. Whatever it is, be very intentional and then try to hit that goal. And if you don't, reset the goals and start over. You're not totally going to change it all in one day, but if again, 1 degree a day, 1% change a day, and you're going to make that change.
Thank you. I appreciate your time so much. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for coming on here and talking to me today. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. It has been enlightening to me too. And I want to say I appreciate what you're doing for the profession. There's
Thank you.
not a lot of outsiders that look in and say, hey, there's some guardians, broken men and women, and I have the knowledge and expertise to fix them and then pouring your life into it. I appreciate that, Paige.
Thank you. That means a lot to me. It really does. I appreciate it.